Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor covering Game 6 of the World Chess Championship match between Anand and Carlsen. Anand playing the white pieces here, defending his title, and he's fallen back by 1 point, so Carlsen is leading by 1 point, and now this game was the second decisive game in a row. So last game Carlsen won with the white pieces, and this time we'll see how Carlsen is dealing with the black pieces here. We have again a Berlin defense in the Ruy Lopez in the Spanish game, which is, as I said in the previous Ruy Lopez game I covered in this World Chess Championship match, it's a very dry opening to many players, but to grandmasters it's a super solid way to play with black. And last time the game went like castles. The pawn was taken, d4, knight back to d6, attacking the bishop, and after this exchange white wins his pawn back. And after this queen exchange, we see that a quick endgame is reached here, and because of the exchange of queens, many players find this line very boring, but to grandmasters it's a very reliable way to play for black, and white really struggled finding a very concrete plan of winning. But you can look at the other Ruy Lopez game I covered recently. This time, which I said last time as well, Anand avoided all these by playing d3, which I said was possible just to not allow the knight to take on e4. Bishop c5 was played now, c3, castles, rook e8, rook e1, and this rook e1 maneuver is not only to improve the rook, but also to give this knight a route to go either to e3 or to g3. And from these squares, the knight often wants to hop into f5, and maybe even, from this square, as we saw, maybe look after d5 as well. So this is a very standard idea in the Ruy Lopez for white. a6 here, and white wants to preserve his bishop pair, bishop a4, b5, and now you can choose between bishop b3 and bishop c2. Bishop b3 was played. Now that bishop looks more active, but also a little bit more vulnerable. For example, knight a5 is a maneuver for black in the Ruy Lopez, which often attacks the bishop on b3, and also prepares maybe c5. Well, in the Ruy Lopez, the placement of the bishop plays a role. This bishop is very active, but it could have been played to e7, so that now c5 would be would be played quicker here. But in this case, knight a5 isn't best, because you can just simply take on f7 check and fork these two pieces. If black then has to regain his pawn, now we have this funny situation of both kings being open on the 7th rank, on the f file, and after the knight moves back, you see that black first of all lost time by moving his knight back and forth, and now white has this queen check, and black doesn't have a corresponding move. So White has a slight initiative here, and a4 is the first step to it. So knight a5 isn't seen, but rather d6. Excuse me. And now bishop g5. One rule in chess is that you should move your pieces as forward as possible, and that's the case here. Also, this bishop pins the knight, which controls the d5 square. Well, we have a rather close position at the moment. So bishop e6, and now many players, many weaker players maybe, would immediately take this bishop. But now you see that this plan of the knight maneuvering to f5 is prohibited. Well, also the other knight, could double on f5. So the knights can double each other on f5, and on f5 there would be a lot of pressure in black's camp. So this plan would be prohibited by exchanging a piece on e6. So just dropping back, bishop takes e6 is out of question, more or less. Knight b to d2 was played instead, and h6, bishop h4, and bishop takes b3. Now Carlsen took with the pawn here, and if you take with the knight, that probably has at least two disadvantages. Of course, you have a normal pawn structure instead of playing pawn takes. Now you have this doubled pawns, but now the rook is open. So that's one plus, and the pawn takes towards the center. It controls then more squares, more important squares, so this is not bad at all. But if you take with the knight, you first of all kick this bishop to b6, and now that pawn is quicker on c5, because now only one more piece has to move back, for example this way, and then you can push your pawn to c5, and you're helping black with this knight b3 move, and instead you lose time with your own maneuver because you move your knight offside. So pawn takes b3, and now black, as I said, needs to move his pieces out of the way to give this pawn the possibility to attack the center. That's very common in the Royal Lopez for black, and we see this plan being prepared step by step. Knight h2 from white just gives this knight maybe this route, and together with this knight, or let's forget about that, the queen can come out as well. So the knight wants to go forward here. Knight f1 here, bishop b6, now c5 is available to black, knight e3, and queen e6. b4 to make it more difficult for black to play c5, a5 to make it easier again. That was exchanged, and now you see white managed to have a healthy pawn structure even though the pawns were doubled. So both players really know what they're doing here. Knight g4, bishop b6, offering a rook's exchange. Now the bishop takes on f6, which might be surprising for some players. But what exactly does this bishop do here? I mean, if it's kicked, it would stare at this pawn and do not really a lot here. So this bishop is exchanged, and this knight as well, and now we have queen g4, and white's pieces excuse me, do look very nice, but for black we have this bishop which looks at this soft square in conjunction with the queen, and that is more or less black's activity here. So this position is rather equal. Now this bishop is being exchanged, and of course the rook cannot take, because the a1 rook would be hanging with check. So pawn takes, and now because of the threat of rook f1 with gain of time, queen e7, rook f1, and c5 finally. And let's go back. You see this doubled pawns, they are not really optimal, but white wants to push d4, and after this exchange we could have a healthier pawn structure. But of course that needs preparation, because that pawn here would be hanging. Okay, c5, king h2, c4, now undermining this pawn chain, very flexible. d4 now, so d4 is provoked, and the rooks are exchanged to drive this rook offside and decoy it from an active file. Queen b7 attacking the e-pawn, and if rook d1 was played, but if d5, now you see that white fixed 3 of his pawns for 2 pawns from the black side. So that's like a that's like admitting or like giving your opponent a present here. So instead rook d1, keeping it more flexible and fluid, and queen c6 was played. Well, what is this all about? Let's drop back. If black would have taken on d4, and the rook would have to take to cover this pawn, now d6 is attacked, and queen c6 would be almost forced here. So if queen c6 anyways, then let's drop back, then queen c6 to prepare any capture. Now the capture here is a threat because of rook takes e4, for example, and queen f4 to cover the e-pawn, and now the pawns are exchanged. Well, excuse me, let's go back. The queen is already covering the pawn, but now with this move, queen f4, we have the rook as well, and the queen is slightly better positioned on f4. Maybe looking someday to play queen d5, attacking the pawn, offering a queen exchange. Yeah. Rook e5, very active, and queen c7. Now the queen and the black queen and the white king are on the same diagonal, which is uncomfortable and might lead to some tactics. So king h1, queen e7, and now black managed to have very nice pressure on the e-file. And as you remember, the bishop here exchanged itself for the knight on e3, and the pawn took And this more or less in this game led to a double pawn which is going to be exchanged for only one pawn. So black managed to win a pawn basically by positional means. Queen g4, king h7, queen f4. So white does not have a concrete plan here. White cannot push pawns and break through. You cannot just push your pawns here because that weaken your king. You cannot push these pawns because this pawn is fixed because of that pawn. And these doubled pawns, they're blocked. So black is for choice here. King h2 just moving back and forth. King g7 improving the position, micro improvements here. Queen f3, rook e6, queen g3, and now white allowed taking the two doubled pawns for exchanging that one pawn from the black side, which leads now to a king side pawn majority, as you can tell. And again, this pawn is fixed, and this gives black an advantage. But yeah, white has to struggle to keep the draw, but somehow it should be possible. But of course, black has to prove that he's slightly better. Rook d5 now, rook b7 and rook d6, not allowing the king to come to f6. So f6 and h4. You don't want to play a move like g4. That again would weaken your king a lot, and rook e7 would be very strong here. So h4, king f7, just rather waiting and maybe kicking the rook soon, and h5. And Carlsen said after the game that he wasn't expecting this idea, but well, let's look how it turned out for Anand. Carlsen took this pawn and rook d5, attacking the pawn. King g6, king g3, rook b6, waiting more or less. Let's drop back. If king h4 here, then the question is what to do. One move would be simply f5, blocking the attack, or b5. And if takes, after b takes, and rook b3, this looks already very difficult. And what to do now? This offside pawn should be winning for black. Rook c5, f5, giving the king the opportunity to move forward. King h4 to stop that. Rook e6. Well, leaving this pawn on pre, but black decides to play on this quarter of the board and to win with his two pawns in yellow here. Of course, you need king and rook to make this happen, but black is sacrificing this pawn to have the rook offside. And now with check, king h3, king g5, and rook to b8. White is trying to hold this, now being on the queen side, one pawn up. So h4 here, giving the king a square basically. Check and king h4. And also this pawn does a nice job of not allowing this king to come out. Rook f8, rook c8, And now you see again this pawn is fixed. You can never push. Sorry, let's give black a move here. You can never push b4 because simply taking en passant and being very quickly and decoying this rook. In the meanwhile, black should be winning. Okay, instead rook f8, again attacking the pawn. Now check, giving this king a square by king h2 and now king g4. And yeah, now if this rook is taken, very bad, and this is clearly winning. Say king here, and now you just push your pawns down the board, maybe king e3 first, and then you're pushing your pawns, and if the pawn takes here, you can just go down and push with check and win. You can also just go back with your king and take the pawn, I believe, the white pawn here. So after king f4, rook back to c8 instead. King e3, rook takes, and that's the question now. After f4, what to do? And now there's basically the only move for white to keep the, or to fight for the draw here, is b4. This is not Anand's move. h3 by Carlsen now to decoy this pawn so that this pawn can run down the board. And you cannot push the f pawn because then the rook would be hanging, so rook g6, rook c8 would be a possibility, f3, check, king d2. Of course you don't want to block your own pawn by going here. b5, f2, rook f8, king e7, check, and if you have to move back and forth, it's a draw. So king f1, then white pushes his pawns, and white would be for choice, but yeah, you can play waiting moves, but in the end you have to play this repetition so that white cannot queen his pawns, and that would be a draw. So b4 would have been the drawing move here probably. Instead, Anand played rook a4, which is losing now. And after pawn takes, rook g6 again, c4, f3, and the c4 move allowed the rook to come to a3 with check. King e2, b4 allowing the check again, f2, rook a2, check, king f3, check, king f4, and now there is no check available, so the rook has to lose time here by playing this maneuver. And well, this was Magnus's move. Let's just drop back. There would have been this nice line with check, having a knight here, and after knight e2, check, king e3, check, king f2, check, we have this mating net. But after rook g1, basically if you play check, well, this pawn is gonna be queening. If check again, you can just hide behind white pawns, the white pawns, and now you can just queen and be a rook up. So after rook g1, Anand resigned to Carlsen, and well, the second decisive and winning game for Carlsen. and that's a very nice lead to have. Now Carlsen leads by 2 pawns, and yeah, there should be a rest day, I think, now, and I'm very happy to see these results. I hope you liked the coverage of the game, and please subscribe, comment, share the video, subscribe as I said, and keep track of the World Chess Championship. I hope you liked it. Bye bye.